I never imagined that something as small as a phone notification could shatter my reality into 1,000 pieces. My wife, Lucia, and I had been married for 10 years. To anyone on the outside, our life seemed like a model of stability and happiness. Lucia was my best friend, my confidant, and I believed we shared everything, or at least, that's what I thought. Our relationship was built on the foundation of mutual trust, or so I had convinced myself all these years. But one night, the illusion of that perfect trust began to crumble, revealing a dark corner I never thought I'd have to face. It all started on a Friday night, a night as ordinary as any other, or so it seemed. Lucia had gone out for dinner with her friends, something she did occasionally. I had no reason to be concerned. I trusted her completely. However, when she returned home, she left her phone on the dining table, and that struck me as odd. Normally, she always carried her phone with her, even to the bedroom or when she went to shower. But that night, for some reason, she left it sitting there, the screen still lit. At first, I didn't think much of it and got ready for bed, chalking it up to a simple oversight. While she was in the shower, the phone emitted a soft glow that caught my attention. I walked over to turn off the screen, but then I noticed a notification, a message from an unknown number. Something inside me began to thrum, an uneasy mix of curiosity and a strange sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I reached out and unlocked the phone, hesitating for a moment. I knew it was wrong, that I was crossing a boundary of trust, but it felt as though something was compelling me to look. When I opened the message, it felt like my heart stopped. The screen displayed a single line of text. "So, when are you going to tell him?" I froze. That message, so brief yet so enigmatic, seemed to conceal something enormous, something that demanded to be uncovered. Tell me what? I thought, a mix of confusion and fear swirling in my mind. A chill ran down my spine. Something I had taken for granted, the solidity of our marriage, now seemed to waver. My mind began spinning, imagining possibilities and weaving doubts. The need for answers had already awakened within me, like a storm I could sense would be unstoppable. The initial curiosity I had felt soon morphed into an anxiety, so heavy it seemed to suffocate me. For days, I tried to push the mysterious message out of my mind, convincing myself that perhaps it meant nothing. Maybe, after all, I had misinterpreted the situation, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. And every time I looked at Lucia, I felt something dark and unknown growing between us. I couldn't stop wondering what was really happening, what secrets lay hidden behind her calm gaze and familiar gestures that, until then, had always filled me with a sense of security. It didn't take long before I gave in to the temptation to investigate further. I waited until Lucia was deeply asleep, and in the dim light of our bedroom, I slipped out of bed and reached for her phone. As I held the device in my hands, a mix of nervousness and guilt coursed through me, yet I couldn't turn back. I knew I was crossing a significant boundary, but something inside me insisted that there was no turning back now, that a truth was waiting to be uncovered, something so unsettling that it had remained hidden for years. The first strange sign appeared in her photo gallery, a series of images taken in places I didn't recognize, with people I had never seen before. Among them was one figure that caught my attention in particular. It was a young man, his face partially visible in one of the photos and in another, captured from behind as he gazed out at an unfamiliar landscape. However, it was Lucia's expression that left me frozen. In some of the photos, she was looking at him with an almost solemn seriousness, as if contemplating something far deeper than a simple friendship. In another, though she was alone in the frame, her smile was so genuine and radiant that it hurt to realize I couldn't recall the last time I'd seen her smile like that. As I swiped through the photos, the weight in my chest grew heavier, and my mind filled with unanswered questions. Who was this man? What role did he play in her life? What kind of relationship did they share? The image of Lucia in those unfamiliar moments was entirely different from the woman I thought I knew. In that moment, I felt as though I was staring at a stranger, and the realization hit me like a tidal wave. Perhaps everything I believed I knew about her and our marriage was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind wrestled with the decision of confronting Lucia or staying silent, waiting to better understand what was happening. I clung to the hope that there was a logical explanation for those photos, but a part of me refused to believe in coincidences. Days went by, and every moment Lucia spent on her phone felt like a provocation, a constant reminder that something was hidden, something that was slowly consuming me. I tried to act normal, but the tension was undeniable. Our silences grew longer, and I pretended everything was fine, while my mind continued weaving a plan to uncover the truth. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided to seize the opportunity. Lucia was sound asleep, so I got up quietly and took her phone once again. This time, I dug deeper. My goal was clear. Find any clue that could explain the content of those photos, and most importantly, the identity of the unknown man. I searched through messaging apps, emails, and social media, looking for any trace that might lead me closer to an answer. However, everything seemed in order, nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to give up when I noticed something. A notes app I'd never seen before, tucked away among less used applications. It was encrypted, requiring a passcode to access. Frustration mixed with an ever-growing need for answers. After several attempts, I managed to unlock it. Inside, I found just one note, but its content was disturbing in its simplicity. Today, I couldn't take it anymore and I ended it. I read it over and over, trying to decipher its meaning. What had Lucia ended? The tone of the words was as enigmatic as it was unsettling. The possibilities running through my mind were endless and increasingly terrifying. I placed the phone back where I found it, trying to remain calm and avoid waking Lucia. As I returned to bed, a whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind, feeding my worst fears. Had she ended things with him? Or was it something much bigger, something that could shake the foundation of our relationship and everything we had built together? That single phrase echoed in my mind, and the uncertainty grew, like an omen of something devastating that was about to collapse right before my eyes. The following days were a true psychological torment. Every time I looked at Lucia, I felt as if her smile was hiding something, that every word and gesture concealed intentions and secrets beyond my comprehension. My mind wouldn't stop formulating increasingly dark theories, ideas that were almost unbearable to entertain. I was trapped in a spiral of doubt and suspicion, with no clear way out. In every casual conversation, every moment of apparent normalcy, I perceived shadows that hadn't been there before. And every time she mentioned running an errand or visiting a friend, I was left with the nagging uncertainty of whether she was being entirely truthful. The anxiety drove me to seek more answers. The mysterious message and the cryptic note weren't enough. There had to be something more. I decided to check our bank accounts, something I had never felt the need to do before. We had always been transparent about finances, with mutual access to our family's accounts. But this time, I noticed a pattern that left me frozen. There were regular transfers to a clinic I had never heard of before. The amounts were small but consistent, as if they were for some kind of ongoing treatment or periodic consultations. I couldn't help but wonder why Lucia had kept this from me. If she needed medical treatment, why hadn't she told me? The thought of her silently battling some illness was deeply unsettling. Yet another, more disturbing possibility began to take shape in my mind. What if these visits to the clinic weren't for her? What if the transfers were for someone else? My thoughts returned to the image of that man in the photos, the stranger who had become an ever-present shadow in our lives. One evening, during dinner, I tried to broach the subject casually. I asked if she had been feeling well lately, if there was anything she wanted to talk to me about. Lucia, seemingly oblivious to the weight of my words, simply smiled kindly and said everything was perfectly fine. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Her response was too simple, too easy. My suspicion deepened, and every word she spoke every kind smile now seemed like a piece of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I needed answers, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to get them. The next day, I would find out the address of the clinic and uncover what role it played in my wife's life. While part of me feared what I might discover, the need to know the truth was stronger than anything else. That afternoon, driven by a mix of desperation and the need for answers, I headed to the clinic, prepared to face whatever reality stood between Lucia and me. The building's exterior was unassuming, almost forgettable, but as I stepped inside, I felt an oppressive weight surround me, as though the place was steeped in hidden stories and secrets. I approached the reception desk, trying my best to appear casual. "Good afternoon," I said, noticing a slight tremor in my voice. "I'm looking for information about a patient." Gabriel, the receptionist, a woman with a kind expression, looked at me with a restrained curiosity. She remained silent for a few moments, as if deciding whether she could trust me. Finally, she offered a soft smile and nodded. "Yes, of course. Gabriel is a regular patient. His usual visitor is Lucia. Are you a relative?" The mention of Lucia caught me off guard, as if that simple statement confirmed what I had already suspected but dreaded confronting. I tried to remain composed. "Yes, Lucia and I were close," I replied, carefully choosing my words. The receptionist nodded, not pressing further about my relationship with Lucia. Then, tilting her head slightly, she added something that left me even more unsettled. "Gabriel is very lucky to have someone so devoted by his side. Not every patient in his situation has that kind of support." I felt the ground beneath me crack. What situation was she referring to? What exactly did she mean? My mind spun with blurry images and conflicting theories. I tried to picture Lucia here, visiting this stranger who now stood between us. I still didn't understand her connection to Gabriel or the reason behind her frequent visits. The name Gabriel meant nothing to me, yet it resonated with an eerie familiarity, as though he had been a part of my life without me knowing it. Before I left, the receptionist paused, as though something else lingered in her thoughts. "It's beautiful when people dedicate themselves to caring for someone, don't you think?" she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion. "Gabriel has made great progress thanks to her." I nodded silently, unable to form a response. With my head full of unanswered questions and my heart torn between suspicion and an unsettling tenderness, I left the clinic without finding the clarity I had hoped for. Yet one thing was certain. Lucia had a secret life I hadn't imagined, and I was drawing closer, perhaps dangerously close, to uncovering a truth that would forever change our relationship. I returned home with my mind tangled in dark thoughts. Gabriel's name echoed in my head, a refrain I couldn't silence. That night, Lucia and I barely exchanged words. Every time I ventured to ask her about her day, she responded with a faint, evasive smile. Watching her, I felt a strange mix of familiarity and estrangement, as though I were sitting next to both a stranger and the woman who had been my partner for so many years. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and a peculiar fear gripped me whenever I considered confronting her. Was I ready to know the truth? One early morning, unable to bear the anxiety any longer, I waited until Lucia was deeply asleep. I slipped quietly to the desk where she kept some personal documents. Maybe, I thought, I could find a clue, something to help me understand who Gabriel was and why he had suddenly appeared in our lives. I searched through papers, notebooks, and old letters. Finally, I found a small envelope, sealed, with no sender or recipient, but bearing Lucia's unmistakable handwriting on the edge. I hesitated before opening it, feeling as though I stood at the brink of crossing a line that could change everything. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded a carefully folded piece of paper. On it were a few lines written by Lucia. "Dear Gabriel, I regret so much the time we've lost. Every day I think of you and what we could have been if things had been different. It's a heavy burden, but I'll do everything I can to make amends. even if you never know who I really am." The words pierced my chest like thorns. There was no clear explanation, but the mention of lost time and the weight Lucia seemed to carry suggested that Gabriel was someone from a past I knew nothing about. Was he an old love, a son perhaps? The letter offered no concrete answers, only a vague outline of regret and an unfinished desire for redemption. Suddenly, I heard movement behind me. I turned slowly and found Lucia standing in the doorway, her face pale and her dark eyes fixed on the envelope in my hands. The tension in the room was palpable, as if we were both teetering on the edge of an abyss. "So, this is how you wanted to find out," she asked in a strained whisper. Her voice trembled, filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. I didn't reply. We simply stared at each other, trapped in a moment of truth neither of us had planned to face this way. I knew the answers to my questions were standing before me, and that once we crossed this threshold, our lives would be forever changed. We stared at each other in silence for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me as my mind scrambled for an explanation. But Lucia held my gaze, her expression heavy with the weight of a long-guarded secret that seemed to have drained her completely. Finally, without breaking eye contact, she stepped forward and gently took the envelope from my hands, as if it were a fragile piece of her life that needed protection. "There are things that, if I told you, would forever change the way you see me," she murmured, her voice low and trembling. Doubt consumed me. For weeks, I had imagined countless scenarios, but now, standing before her, I felt powerless, incapable of understanding what someone so close could possibly be hiding. This was Lucia, my wife, the woman I had shared an entire life with. And yet, she felt like a stranger, someone with a history as deep as it was unknown to me. "Then tell me, Lucia," I whispered. "I can't keep living in the dark, making up versions of the truth that might not even be close to reality." She sat down beside me, clutching the envelope tightly in her hands. Her gaze wandered around the room as if searching for the right words in the shadows. Finally, she began to speak, but every word seemed to cost her a piece of herself. "Gabriel, he's someone who came into my life when I was very young," she started, her voice steady but forced. "Before I met you, before I even knew what kind of life I would have. Things weren't easy for me in those years, and I made decisions that still haunt me to this day." I listened, trying to read between the lines, but every sentence only raised more questions. Who was Gabriel really? A former lover, a long-lost brother, a connection she had silently carried for years? Her tone was ambiguous, her gaze darting nervously, as though saying more might shatter some delicate balance. "I couldn't forget him," she continued, her voice now barely a whisper. "But I also knew that telling you everything would be hard to accept. I looked for him not knowing if I should, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I couldn't live not knowing if he was okay." My chest tightened. I still didn't have clear answers, but something in her words made it evident that Gabriel wasn't part of her present. He was a ghost from her past, a shadow she had carried alone for years. For the first time, I felt the fear of knowing the truth and the fear of never knowing it. I realized I was on the brink of understanding everything, but the pain in her eyes made me hesitate. Was I truly ready to hear the truth I had so desperately sought? Lucia took a deep breath, as if the weight of her secret was crushing her chest. Her eyes, filled with guilt and fear, met mine. Eyes that seemed to have anticipated this moment for years, yet dreaded it every single day. Finally, her words cut through the silence, releasing a truth I never could have imagined. "Gabriel," her voice trembled, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Gabriel is our son." I froze, utterly shocked. My body felt paralyzed as my mind grappled with the words I had just heard. Our son, two words that made no sense. They couldn't possibly be true. I stared at her in silence, searching her face for some clue, waiting for her to say it was a mistake. "You and I managed to whisper, barely able to breathe. "We never had children." Lucia nodded, her expression laden with profound pain, as if pleading for forgiveness without saying a word. Many years ago, before we got married, I found out I was pregnant. She began, her voice so quiet it was barely audible. But you were just starting your career, chasing your dreams. I didn't want to be the one to hold you back. I thought it would be better not to tell you, and I gave Gabriel up for adoption. I thought he would have a better life, and we could go on with ours. The world seemed to stop entirely. Each word she spoke felt like a blow, like a wound I couldn't heal. How could something so monumental, so life-altering, have been hidden from me for so long? And you never thought to tell me. I whispered, my voice trembling under the weight of sadness, anger, and confusion that I couldn't control. Lucia began to cry, burying her face in her hands. It hit me then. She had carried this burden alone all these years, trying to live with a secret that was too heavy to bear. I looked for him recently, and when I saw him, I couldn't stay away. I couldn't be near him as his mother, so I got close as a family friend. I just needed to know how he was, even if he would never know who I really am, she said, her voice breaking with desperation. But seeing him, knowing he exists and will never know me, it's tearing me apart. We sat there in silence, trapped in a truth so harsh, so painful, it threatened to unravel everything we had built together. I knew that after that night, nothing would ever be the same. We would either choose to carry this past together and work to heal, or this dark revelation would forever divide us. That night, we learned that love and truth, as painful as they may be, are the only things capable of healing wounds so deep. Lucia's revelation changed our lives forever, but it also gave us the chance to rebuild a relationship grounded in complete honesty, no matter how painful that honesty was. Sometimes, facing the darkness of the past is the first step toward finding true peace. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and subscribe for more tales full of mystery and emotions.